Welcome everyone. Today finds me in Phoenix, Arizona, where in 1931 the house behind me was the scene of a heinous double homicide. Back in 1931 there was a terrible homicide in the house behind me, but interestingly enough, our story does not start in Phoenix, Arizona. No, the start of the story is where it actually ends, 400 miles away in Los Angeles. Before we get into the story, let's introduce you to our cast of characters. First person I'm going to introduce you to is Winnie Ruth Judd. Just 26 years old, she was an attractive small woman, barely 5'4". I'd be surprised if she tipped the scales at more than 110 pounds. Next on our list is Happy Jack Halloran. Jack Halloran was a man who was rather well-to-do. He was in his mid-40s. He was a successful businessman here in Phoenix. And remember, 1931 was during the Depression. He was in the lumber business and he was a philanderer. He was a well-known playboy in the area, but yet he was really plugged into the community and he was a member of the country club. Next up, Agnes and Leroy, who simply went by Anne. Anne was a young woman also in her 20s who was an x-ray technician at a local medical clinic. And Anne's good friend, Hedvig Samuelson, age 32, who simply went by the nickname Sammy. It was in this house where Sammy and Anne lived together. They had moved down from Alaska after Sammy contracted tuberculosis. At that time, the dry, arid climate was good for TB and plenty of people would move here. Ruth worked as a secretary at a medical clinic, the same one where Anne was an x-ray technician. The two became friends, and before long, Anne, Sammy, and Ruth all moved in together into this house. Like many murder mysteries, this one had several versions, several of them told by Ruth herself that came out in court. The version I'm going to tell you is from a 1933 written confession that Ruth made to her attorney. And it's the one story that I've been able to find where all the pieces fit very neatly into place. So it's a story that I'm going to share with you. As I said, our story starts in Los Angeles. In 1931, Ruth boarded a train from Phoenix to LA with 2 steamer trunks. Once she arrived, the baggage handler noticed that one of the trunks had a foul odor and there were liquids seeping out of it. Before he could ask Ruth exactly what it was and force her to open the trunk, she got in the car of her brother, who was a college student there in Los Angeles, and she hightailed it out of there. Well, the baggage handler contacted police and they came and opened up the trunk. And what they found inside shook the nation. This was the trial of the century before O.J. Simpson was even born. What they found inside was almost beyond belief. In one trunk was the dead, murdered body of a woman. In the next trunk, the smaller trunk, were the disembodied pieces of a second woman. In her confession, Ruth explained exactly what happened. It appears that all 3 women were involved with Happy Jack Halloran. Being the philandering playboy that he was, if it would have ended there, maybe things would have been okay. Except for the behavior of Anne LeRoi. According to Ruth's confession, Anne would taunt her relationship with Happy Jack. Ruth said that Anne would flirt with him and probably do other things with him in front of her that are not suitable for this channel. Whatever it was, it enraged her. On that fateful night in 1931, Ruth came to this house. She still had a key from when they lived together, and she brought with her a gun and a knife. And she said she left the gun and the knife outside the back door, which I assume is this door right here. And then, using her key, she entered the front door of the house when Sammy and Anne were inside. And from here on out, the story just gets stranger and stranger. She said that she curled up on the couch and fell asleep with Anne and Sammy in the nearby bedroom. She said throughout the night she would wake up because Sammy kept getting up and going to the bathroom. And every time she'd get up to go to the bathroom, she would get up and start to sneak into the bedroom because Anne was her target. Now, she didn't say in the confession exactly when she went outside and picked up the knife and the gun, but somehow she ended up with them. And every time she would sneak, she apparently would get nervous or get fearful, and she would slink back into the living room and fall back asleep on the couch. One time, when Sammy went to the bathroom, she took the gun and she shot Anne LeRoi as she slept. And that would have occurred in one of the bedrooms, possibly this room right here. And now as I see it, there is another door which very well may have been the back door where the weapons were kept. But regardless, she killed Anne LeRoi point blank in one of these rooms. At that point, she heard Sammy's voice from the bathroom shout, "Anne, what dropped?" Sammy came out, and she and Ruth started wrestling with the gun. Ruth said that she had no intention of hurting Sammy, but when Sammy started wrestling, she took the knife and stabbed her in the shoulder. And she said it was a cheap knife and it didn't cause a lot of damage. Long story short, at some point, Sammy was shot dead. At some point during that struggle, quite possibly, Ruth was shot through the hand. The reason I say quite possibly is this is another point where the story differs just a little bit. And although we don't know exactly how the struggle played out, we do know when it was done, both Anne and Sammy were dead. All of this happened in the early morning hours. In fact, according to Ruth's confession, right before the murder, she heard the milkman outside. She said by the time of the murders, it was about 6:30 or 7 a.m. And here's an excerpt from her confession. "I tugged and pulled and finally got Anne from the bed into the trunk. Now, it doesn't sound possible, but all this took about 2 hours. I left for the office. I pulled the trunk with Anne's body into the living room, but the trunk was unlocked. Sammy was on the bathroom floor all day Saturday. This all happened in the morning." She took with her the knife, the gun, went to work, spent the whole day at work, went back to her place, fed the cat, and then came back to this house. This time she said she climbed in the window. Why she climbed in the window, if she had a key, I'm not sure, but maybe it was to avoid being seen. She said that she pulled the trunk with Anne's body, inch by inch. It took all the effort she had to move that trunk into the living room. Then she said she tried to move Sammy's body, but she said she couldn't lift it. It was too heavy and stiff. So she got 2 cheap knives from the kitchen and started to work, hacking the body in pieces. At this point, she went into the bathroom to wash off the gun. She said while it was underwater, a remaining bullet in the gun went off. It's been surmised that this may have been the bullet that lodged in Ruth's hand. Regardless, we do know that she called some baggage men, and they told her that the trunks were too heavy to ship as baggage. I guess that's when she made the determination to take them on the train with her to Los Angeles. She said that the bloody mattress was rolled up in the living room right in front of the baggage handlers. It later turned up miles away, partially burned. And while this was a case of jealousy, it isn't the last we heard of Happy Jack Halloran. It was speculated that putting these 2 women in a trunk and cutting them to pieces was too much for a small, frail woman to do all by herself. And while Jack Halloran was investigated, there was no evidence whatsoever that he was involved in the murder or the cover-up, and he was never brought to trial. And once the murders were discovered, this crime scene was compromised almost beyond belief. Although the police entered first, very soon after, neighbors, reporters, photographers were all able to enter that building. And perhaps strangest of all, the day after the discovery of the murder, The landlord put ads in the local papers offering tours of this house at 10 cents apiece, and hundreds of people trampled through. Strange as it may seem, I guess things like that went on in the 1930s. In the end, Ruth Judd was convicted of murder. Now back then they did not have an insanity plea. She was found guilty of murder, and they had to have a second trial to see if she was of sound mind. After her sentence, Ruth was placed in an asylum, where over the course of the next 3 decades, she escaped no fewer than 6 times. The last of which, in the 1960s, she managed to evade capture for 6 years when she moved to California and started working as a maid for a wealthy family. Years later, in an interview, one of the investigating officers surmised that they let her out of the asylum because they didn't want her around. But once people started reporting seeing her, they had no alternative but to pick her up and bring her back to the asylum. She was finally discharged in 1971, and she was discharged from her parole in 1983, more than 50 years after the murders. During that 6-year period, when she worked as a maid, she went by the name Mary Ann Lane. And that's the name she used once she was released, until the time of her death. In fact, it's a name that is now found on her tombstone. And she died at the ripe old age of 93. And it's actually pretty amazing that this house is even still standing, because as we look around, you see it is completely surrounded by modern structures, high rises, parking structures, and businesses. Who knows what the future holds for this infamous murder house? But for now, it can still be seen standing on the corner in Phoenix, Arizona. As for Happy Jack Halloran, I have no idea what happened to him. I hope you enjoyed our story, everybody. As always, I encourage you to like and share the videos. If you haven't already, please subscribe and ring the bell icon up above so you know when I post new videos. And please consider becoming a sponsor of this channel. $3 sponsors get postcards from all the various places I visit, like Phoenix, Arizona. Thanks for watching. I'm Mark with the Average Me channel.